The dog looked at the sewer every day. People were shocked when they opened the hatch. Imagine walking through a peaceful town at the end of the afternoon. A soft breeze sways the leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks, and the sun sets lazily. Behind the brick buildings, there is a quiet, almost dreamlike silence that makes everything seem slower, as if time were granting a reprieve from the worries of daily life. In this setting, every detail appears laden with gentle beauty. The creaking of old windows, the distant sound of hurried footsteps, the occasional bark of a dog in some nearby yard. The twilight paints the sky in shades of pink and orange, and the first stars dare to twinkle in the firmament, heralding a serene night. Now, in the midst of this almost idyllic picture, something unusual catches your attention. You notice a dog, but not just any dog. He is standing still, as if made of stone, staring at a specific spot in a nearby park. His eyes seem fixed on something you cannot see, and his muzzle moves delicately, as if it were picking up scents from a distant past, or from an event yet to happen. At first glance, it may seem like an ordinary scene. After all, it's normal to see animals sniffing around. But there's something different about this dog, a mysterious aura emanating from him. This seemingly simple moment carries a magnetism that sparks the curiosity of anyone watching. And believe me, this moment will forever change the perception of the town's residents, and perhaps yours as well. This dog has a name, Charlie. A simple name, but one that would soon become synonymous with persistence and sensitivity. He doesn't draw attention merely because of his elegant posture, firm back and proud neck, or the intense gleam in his brown eyes, but because of his unwavering habit of staying in that exact spot in the park every day, without fail, as if he were waiting for something or someone. People around start to notice Charlie's steadfastness. Some pass by quickly, paying little attention, while others feel a strange unease when they see him. Why does that dog stay in that corner of the lawn, near that big leafy tree? Many wonder. What could possibly fascinate him there? In the first 30 seconds you lay eyes on this scene, a series of questions spring to mind. Might Charlie have lost something? Is there a toy buried there? Or who knows, is there an untold story beneath the roots of that tree? In such circumstances, people commonly turn away and go on with their routines. After all, it's just a dog. But this time, something in Charlie's posture is different. There's a mysterious air hanging in the air, a silent force keeping him still, making it impossible to ignore him. Curiosity takes over and you find yourself compelled to learn more, and it is precisely this desire that drives the town's residents, and now you, reading this story, on a journey full of discoveries, unity, and valuable lessons about the power of memories and the subtle yet profound connection between humans and animals. It's almost impossible not to form expectations about what is about to happen. If you've ever felt that genuine curiosity regarding the enigmatic behaviors of animals, prepare to dive into a story that goes beyond any immediate rational explanation. Get ready to meet Margaret, a lady with a welcoming smile who decides to follow Charlie's footsteps to uncover what fascinates him so much. Discover the old letter and the mysterious item that will emerge as clues from a past filled with tenderness, and understand how a simple dog in a small town can awaken everyone's solidarity and become a symbol of hope and unity. Stay with us until the end, because each minute of this journey will bring a new piece to this puzzle, and I guarantee that once you discover the whole truth, you will never look at an animal's determination in the same way again. Charlie's story takes place in Cedarville, a quiet location almost cut off from the rest of the world. The name Cedarville refers to the cedars that once dominated the local landscape, although nowadays they share space with oaks and maples. The streets are well maintained, with few traffic signs and very few stoplights because traffic is always light. There are flower-filled squares, wooden benches, a central bandstand for musical performances on festive dates, and houses with inviting porches, many decorated with vibrant flower pots. In Cedarville, everyone knows each other by name and greets one another on the streets with a genuine smile, as if each encounter were an opportunity to strengthen community ties. Not that there aren't disagreements or gossip here. They do happen, but gently, almost as extensions of the residents' natural curiosity. It's common for someone to ask in the local store, "Did you see what happened to so-and-so?" Or, "Did you hear about the news at what's-his-name's house?" Yet beneath it all lies a sense of caring rather than judgment. There is an organic network of cooperation. If the baker finds out that someone is struggling financially, he may provide extra bread that week. If the school teacher notices a sad student, she doesn't hesitate to talk to the family. In this web of solidarity, any event, no matter how small, can become the topic of the day, and in no time, the whole town knows about it. Thus, it's no surprise that, as soon as Charlie's behavior caught some people's attention, word spread quickly throughout the area. In the beginning, few noticed the dog's routine. The children playing in the park realized that he was always there, but didn't pay much attention. To them, he was just another animal roaming around, though they did find it curious that he remained so focused on the same spot. Adults, on the other hand, passed by absorbed in their tasks, glancing at their watches, worried about bills and appointments. However, as the days went by, Charlie's presence began to unsettle common sense. After all, it wasn't normal for a dog to spend so much time fixed on one specific spot, almost as if he were standing watch. A certain buzz began. At the grocery store, a man would comment, "I see that dog there every day at the same time, staring at the same place. Could he be sick?" The store owner replied, "He doesn't seem sick. He's strong and well looked after. I bet he's just looking for food." The mailman, who always crossed the park on his route, added, "But he doesn't eat anything I give him. He just stays there, staring at the ground." And so various speculations arose. Maybe he's looking for a buried toy. Perhaps he's an abandoned dog, but he doesn't look skinny. Could it be that his owner died and he's waiting for him to return? Initially scattered, these questions echoed until the town began to wonder collectively. What on earth is holding that dog's attention at that patch of ground next to that huge tree? In no time, Charlie went from canine anonymity to the main topic of conversation at the bakery and in the coffee gatherings on people's porches. Of all the people intrigued by the situation, the most captivated was a lady named Margaret. With gray hair, always neatly combed, and a smile so warm that anyone would feel at home by her side, Margaret couldn't ignore the pull of that scene. Widowed many years ago, she lived alone in a charming house filled with books, vinyl records, and photo albums. She was known for her hospitality and, above all, for her huge, empathetic heart. Margaret liked to start her day with a fragrant cup of tea and end it with some contemplative reading on her porch, enjoying the sunset. On her shelves were countless photo albums documenting parties, trips, family moments, and even everyday scenes of the town in different eras. To Margaret, taking photos and saving memories was essential. She believed that each image carried its own story, and therefore could not be forgotten. When she heard about a dog that spent hours staring at one spot in the park, as if guarding a secret, she couldn't resist her curiosity. She felt an almost maternal urge to investigate, to offer help, and perhaps discover if the dog needed something. So on a Saturday morning, dressed in a light sweater to ward off the morning chill, she went to the park with a small packet of dog treats. She had already asked some children who played near the tree where Charlie stayed, so she had no trouble finding him. There he was, sitting, almost motionless, staring at an exact spot on the lawn, near the exposed roots of a century-old tree. Margaret approached cautiously, worried that he might be startled or run away, but Charlie didn't move at all. He neither growled nor bared his teeth. He merely glanced away for a second, assessed her presence, and returned to gazing at that spot. It was as though he were saying, Yes? If you'd like to join me, go right ahead. But don't expect much interaction, because I'm busy. Unsure what to think, Margaret sat down on a nearby bench to watch. She gave a small whistle to see if the dog would react, rattled the dog biscuits, and called out the name on his collar. It had Charlie embroidered on it, but no address. Nothing seemed to distract him. After some time, he glanced at Margaret out of the corner of his eye but immediately returned to his sentinel pose, as if he were waiting for something. Then the old woman began to wonder if there might be a bird or squirrel's nest there, something Charlie was protecting, or perhaps an injured animal. But nothing in particular drew her attention. It was a park nook with abundant grass, some fallen leaves, and little dry branches. There was no distinctive noise, no small creature moving around, just the tree, with a thick, imposing trunk, and its roots spread out over the surface of the soil. When Margaret went home, she couldn't get that scene out of her head. In the following days, Margaret returned to the park to observe Charlie, and while she discreetly investigated, more people started to gather. As in any small town, Cedarville had a steady stream of information circulating through the cafes, the barber shop, the school, and the church. It wasn't long before a variety of onlookers decided to take a peek at the park to see the dog's behavior. Theories sprang up everywhere. Some said Charlie sensed a spirit's presence, or that there was a portal to something mysterious. Others, more pragmatic, thought there might be some lingering scent in the soil, perhaps leftover food or bones, but no theory matched reality. After all, many tried to distract the dog with treats, to no avail. Some children even tried playing with him, throwing colorful balls to see if he would react. It was pointless. It was as if Charlie had a higher purpose, a mission that prevented him from being distracted. And this strange determination stirred the town's imagination. "There's something different about him," they kept saying. And indeed, there was. One day, one of the kids noticed that whenever Margaret approached and tried talking to the dog, he would move his ears, as if paying attention to her voice. Yet still his priority was always that specific spot on the ground. It was as though something called him more strongly than any external stimulus, a silent summons that only Charlie could hear. As time passed, the town split into skeptics and curious observers. The skeptics insisted there was nothing odd. "He's just a dog with a quirk of hanging out there, end of story." The curious, however, wanted to know more and craved a resolution, an explanation as extraordinary as Charlie's behavior. In this atmosphere of collective questioning, Margaret decided to take more decisive action. On a sunny morning, Margaret appeared in the park carrying a small hand rake, the kind used to loosen soil in flower pots. She greeted Charlie warmly, and to her surprise, the dog wagged his tail slightly as if he recognized her and was happy to see her. It was a brief moment, but enough to warm her heart and encourage her to continue. Carefully, she knelt beside Charlie and began to clear away the dry leaves and twigs covering the ground. The soil was moist, as it had rained a bit that week. At first everything looked normal, just dirt and tree roots. But after a few minutes of cautious digging, Margaret felt something soft yet slightly rigid against the rake. Her heart began to race. It could be a plastic bag, some trash, or anything. Unimportant. Still, something told her there was more to it. Patiently, she brushed away the dirt around the object until she was able to pull it out. It was a yellowed bag, weathered with time, with a fragile texture that nearly fell apart in her hands. By now, a small group of onlookers had formed, watching anxiously. Charlie, for his part, tilted his head and perked his ears, as if hoping Margaret would examine its contents. And indeed, there was something inside the bag. Taking care not to tear the material, she removed a parcel containing some object. Inside, this parcel were an old letter and a small metal box, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. The letter was folded and tied with a faded ribbon that was nearly disintegrating, and the paper showed signs of moisture and mold yet remained partially intact. Margaret stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her pants. She looked around to see if anyone had any clue about what this might be. Most merely shook their heads, as curious as she was. Then she turned to Charlie and, in an almost instinctive gesture, thanked him. Although the dog couldn't understand her exact words, his expression seemed satisfied, as if to say, "Now you've found what I wanted you to find." With trembling hands, Margaret unfolded the letter. The writing was blurred, but one could still make out a neat, old-fashioned script. There were fragments, parts of disjointed sentences, enough to see it was written by someone named Emily. There were references to a dog named Toby and to something lost in that place. The text was full of emotion, as if its author were bidding farewell to something or pleading that, in the future, someone would find it. Inside the small metal box was a tiny silver pendant, tarnished and darkened by time, in the shape of a dog's paw. Along with it was a slightly rusted medallion with nearly illegible letters. Some onlookers tried to decipher the writing, but it was too worn away. Each attempt to read sparked new questions. Could it have belonged to Emily? Why did she bury it here with the letter? Who was Toby, and what did he mean to this person? Margaret sensed she would need help deciphering these items. The paper was so fragile that it would crumble if handled carelessly. The metal objects, in turn, required cleaning and proper preservation. And of course, there was an entire historical aspect to consider. Who was Emily? Where had she lived? What had she lost? And why was that part of the park so important? Thus, the find became not just a curious puzzle, but a window into Cedarville's past. News of the discovery spread as fast as the smell of freshly baked bread at the local bakery. Within a few hours, it seemed everyone in town knew Margaret had unearthed an old letter and a mysterious object, thanks to the insistence of the enigmatic dog Charlie. Spontaneously, people began offering their help. In a town accustomed to coming together in times of need, this mystery presented an opportunity to exercise its sense of community. Margaret, who did not care to keep secrets, invited anyone interested to come to her home that same afternoon. She needed help from someone who understood old manuscripts, from someone who knew local history, and even from someone who could examine the piece of jewelry and assess its condition. She also hoped to hear stories from older residents who might recall some Emily from long ago. That late afternoon, while the sun cast a golden glow and sank on the horizon, Margaret's living room slowly filled with people. There was the grocery store owner, who brought homemade donuts and coffee, the elementary school teacher, who was very interested in history and literature, a young veterinary student who was busy analyzing Charlie's behavior to understand what drove him, the mailman who reread the letter trying to decipher every bit of penmanship. Charlie, of course, was there, lying quietly in a corner of the room, the guest of honor. After handing out cups of tea, Margaret placed the letter on the coffee table, asking that everyone handle it carefully. A sort of circle formed as each took turns reading parts of it, attempting to interpret them. "Look here, it seems like she's talking about losing my most precious possession," someone pointed out. "Here, you can see. Dear Toby, I don't know how to thank you for..." "But it's faded," someone else tried. In this way, fragments emerged, gradually piecing together Emily's story. Meanwhile, the small metal box and the paw-shaped pendant gave rise to numerous speculations. Was it a family symbol? An inheritance? Did it have monetary value or only sentimental worth? It was remarkable how curiosity brought people closer together. Some, more pragmatic, suggested that all this fuss might just be a waste of time, but they were soon overshadowed by those genuinely captivated. There was a wave of emotion in the air, as if Cedarville had woken up from a lull and rediscovered the joy of unraveling a secret. In the following days, an informal committee formed to investigate the mystery. Some people focused on the letter, carefully cleaning the blurred parts, scanning it digitally to enlarge the details. Others volunteered to rummage through the town's historical archives at City Hall, which stored birth, marriage, death records, and even old newspapers. The school teacher took responsibility for examining the small local library, filled with clippings of town news. Meanwhile, Margaret tried to determine if Charlie truly played a part in this story or if it was merely a coincidence. After all, maybe the dog was just sniffing around something that intrigued him, without any spiritual or historical connection to the site. But each time she saw Charlie in the park, so steady, so resolute, she had the feeling it wasn't mere chance. Significant find appeared in a 1945 edition of Cedarville's local newspaper. There was a short piece, but with a striking title: "Girl Loses Precious Item in Local Park and Mobilizes Residents." The article said that a young girl named Emily Thompson had been desperately looking for something she'd dropped near the big central tree in the park. The piece didn't specify the object but did mention that the girl's dog, Toby, was helping in the search. In a somewhat lyrical tone, the journalist noted that the girl was heartbroken and that many had been moved by her plight. But apparently the object had never been found. This confirmed at least 2 points. Emily had indeed lost something important in the park in 1945, and Toby was the name of her dog. However, many links were still missing. Who were Emily's family members? Did she remain in town afterward? Why was that part of the park so important to her that she buried a letter and a pendant there? All the while, another question was circulating. Did Charlie have an owner? And if so, why was the dog free to roam the park every day? Could he really be a stray that the community had adopted, or did he belong to someone? Then John came forward, a middle-aged man who had lived in Cedarville for years, claiming Charlie was his. He explained that although he provided Charlie shelter, food, and care, the dog always slipped out in the morning to go to the park. John, who worked irregular hours, couldn't fully prevent Charlie's excursions, but he also wasn't overly worried, as he was sure the dog wouldn't harm anyone. "He always comes home at the end of the day like it's a ritual," John said, scratching his head. "But I have no idea why he likes that spot in the park so much. It's as if something calls him." Margaret and the others were surprised but relieved to learn Charlie wasn't abandoned. On the contrary, John took good care of him. Now, the dog not only had a home but also an extended family throughout the community, which had grown fond of his mysterious mission. It was common to see someone offering him fresh water or trying to play with him to ease the tension, but Charlie invariably returned to his designated spot by the tree. John, for his part, joined the investigation committee. He was just as eager as everyone else to unravel what was happening with his faithful companion. A determined group of residents began frequenting the small historical library. There they found records of families who had lived in the area in the early 20th century. Many Thompson families, but only one with a daughter named Emily, whose birth was recorded around 1930. The document showed her parents as Henry and Lydia Thompson, with few additional details but indicating the family had lived in a house near the park. Digging deeper, the group found a death certificate for Henry Thompson, dated 1937. He had died in an accident. From that point on, things got murky. Lydia Thompson didn't appear in subsequent records, suggesting she might have left Cedarville or also passed away. Occasionally, a reference appeared to a younger sister of Emily named Eleanor, but again lacking detail. Meanwhile, the letter was being deciphered bit by bit. New passages were uncovered, such as, "I cannot leave this place without leaving a trace. Toby feels there is still hope. And, if one day you find this object, please understand the love I kept in it." Each newly read line left Margaret and the others more moved. It became evident that Emily wrote these words amid deep sorrow. It was more than a mere lament. It was almost a time capsule, a plea to the future. As the investigation gained momentum, the idea arose to interview older people who might have lived during Emily's time. That's when they discovered Sally, a 90-year-old woman who lived in a retirement home in the neighboring town. She was known for having a good memory of her youth, although she sometimes mixed up dates. Sally received Margaret and the other curious townsfolk with a friendly smile. Upon hearing the name Emily Thompson, her face took on the look of someone trying to piece together long-forgotten memories. She asked for a glass of water, adjusted her glasses, and began to speak. She recalled a girl named Emily who used to run around the park with a dog named Toby, seemingly inseparable companions. She mentioned that at one point, word spread that Emily had lost a family heirloom and that her dog tried to help her find it, unsuccessfully. After that, Sally didn't have much more information. She only remembered that Emily vanished from Cedarville, taking with her the sorrow of not retrieving what was lost. This account matched the old newspaper article. Although Sally couldn't recall many details, she confirmed that the loss was quite significant for Emily. Unfortunately, she didn't know if Emily had ever come back to the town later in life, or if she had died somewhere else. Even so, every scrap of memory Sally could offer fueled the group's determination. They now had a clear goal: find out what truly happened to Emily, Toby, and the object that so deeply distressed her. While searching the City Hall archives, Elizabeth, the local school teacher, found a document that reignited everyone's hopes. A 1952 marriage certificate for Emily Thompson and a man with the last name Barnes. According to the document, they married in Cedarville, but it provided few details about whether they stayed or moved away. One notable detail was the name of one of the witnesses, Eleanor Barnes. The matching surname and Eleanor's presence as a witness suggested she could be Emily's sister or maybe a cousin who adopted the same name. The group now had a new lead. The Barnes family might still have descendants in the area, or at least some records. The research continued, but there were scant references. The mystery persisted, but at least they knew Emily had gotten married. Possibly she had children or grandchildren, or maybe she was still alive, though that seemed increasingly unlikely given how much time had passed. While some delved deeper into the history, younger members of the group focused on examining the pendant and medallion found in the small box. They cleaned them with appropriate solutions to remove rust without damaging any markings. Eventually, they made out a few letters on the medallion which, though still hard to read, resembled ET or EB, causing some confusion. The paw-shaped pendant clearly symbolized a love of dogs. Some speculated it was a gift for Emily. Others thought it might be a family heirloom, custom-made to represent Toby. These objects, laden with affection and history, were carefully placed in a special box that Margaret displayed prominently in her home. Every night she found herself rereading fragments of the letter, wondering how a loss from 1945 could still resonate so strongly, even attracting a modern-day dog. Rational explanations were elusive, and perhaps logic alone could not account for something touching deeper levels of human and canine sensitivity. Meanwhile, Charlie continued steadfast in his routine. He would leave John's house in the morning and walk straight to the park. He stayed there, sometimes sitting, sometimes lying down, but always watching the same spot. By evening, he returned home, greeted by John. On a few occasions, John tried following him, but nothing unusual happened. Charlie just remained by that tree, like a silent guardian. If John tried to force him to move away, Charlie resisted. He wouldn't growl or bite, he simply refused to leave. It was as if he still had a mission to complete, even after the letter and the pendant had been unearthed. Over time, Charlie's presence became a symbol of persistence. People began drawing inspiration from the dog to reflect on their own life goals. If he doesn't give up on something we don't even understand, why do we humans give up so easily on our dreams? Asked a young woman aspiring to study veterinary medicine. In a way, Charlie became a local celebrity. Children loved taking pictures with him when he let himself be distracted, and even some tourists passing through by chance heard the story and came to check it out. Now that they knew about Eleanor Barnes, possibly Emily's sister or relative, the group felt compelled to locate her at any cost. Perhaps she was the only person capable of explaining what happened after 1945. That's when one of the committee members, Robert, who was assigned to check property records and family ties, got lucky. He found a document listing an Eleanor Barnes as a resident of a care facility right there in Cedarville. Apparently, there was more than one nursing home in the area, and no one had located her on the first try. But deeper research revealed that Eleanor Barnes was indeed registered, although her health status was fragile. The news spread through town like wildfire. Margaret and Elizabeth decided to head to the facility immediately to see if Eleanor could shed light on the mystery. Upon arrival, they found a frail old woman with snow-white hair, gazing out the window with a distant expression. They introduced themselves, explained about Charlie, the letter they had found, the name Emily, and asked if she knew anything about all that. At first, Eleanor seemed confused, as though trying to assemble pieces of a forgotten puzzle. Then, in a trembling voice, she whispered, "Emily is my sister. I haven't seen her for so many years. She left." No one spoke for several seconds. Margaret, deeply moved, felt an urgent need to show the elderly woman what they had discovered. She took a photograph of the letter from her purse. The original was too delicate to carry around casually. Upon seeing Emily's handwriting, Eleanor brought her hands to her mouth in surprise. Tears welled up in her eyes. She took several deep breaths, as though the memories weighed heavily on her heart, and began recounting her family story. According to Eleanor, when they were children, they lost their father in an accident. The mother, devastated and without resources, left Cedarville for a while, going to live with relatives in another city. Emily, the older sister, was attached to the dog Toby, which she had taken in after finding it abandoned. For Emily, Toby was more than just a pet. He was a loyal friend, a source of joy and security in a world that felt cold and uncertain. Life went on until 1945, when during a game in the park, Emily realized she'd lost a pendant of great sentimental value, a gift inherited from their mother, something that had been in the family for generations. She spent days desperately searching the park, asking for help, but no one managed to find it. Toby also tried, sniffing around tirelessly. Emily was devastated, Eleanor said, wiping her tears. That pendant symbolized the last link we had to our mother, who was already very ill. It felt like proof that, despite everything, we were still connected to our family's past. Eleanor explained that although the town initially rallied around Emily's plight, World War II was still casting its shadow, and soon everyone's attention shifted elsewhere. Emily, inconsolable, never overcame the loss of the pendant. A short time later, Toby mysteriously disappeared, dealing her the final blow. Emily then decided to record her feelings in a letter and bury with it whatever remained of that pendant or a replica of it, hoping that if Toby or someone else found it in the future, they would understand her pain. "I didn't know she'd actually buried something," Eleanor said. "I was very young at the time, but I remember seeing her cry for hours, clinging to Toby. When Toby vanished, she withdrew into herself. Our mother, already very sick, passed away not long after." Emily moved to another city, where she lived, with an aunt. She did come back to Cedarville to get married to George Barnes years later, and I married his cousin, which is how I ended up with the same last name. But life got complicated, and each of us followed our own path. Eleanor went on to say that Emily had a relatively peaceful life after her marriage, but she always carried a certain sadness over losing the pendant and Toby. At one point, Emily and George moved far away. They exchanged letters for a while, but over the years, the letters became infrequent. Eleanor's last contact with Emily had been decades ago, and she had no idea where her sister might have died or whether she was still alive. When she finished, Margaret and Elizabeth were deeply moved. The frail woman before them had carried an emotional burden for decades. The pieces of the puzzle now fit together. The letter Charlie had led them to was Emily's cry of grief, a plea for help or redemption. But there was another detail sparking curiosity. Which exact object had Margaret and her group unearthed? Was it the original pendant or a replacement Emily had created to represent her loss? Upon seeing photos of the paw-shaped pendant and the medallion, Eleanor confirmed they were similar to those her mother wore. She said her mother had owned a silver piece with the family's initials, and a love of dogs had been passed down for generations because their great-grandfather bred hunting dogs. Emily had personalized that legacy. She'd had a paw engraved, representing Toby or a beloved dog. This detail symbolized both her family identity and her deep bond with Toby. With these revelations, it became clear the best course was to bring Eleanor to the park so she could see the place where the objects were found. Plus, the community was already planning to return the pendant and letter to her, since she was now the only living person who knew this story intimately and shared Emily's bloodline. So they planned a special day, an informal sort of ceremony to commemorate the discovery and honor the past. The idea was to bring together everyone who had joined the investigation, and of course, have Charlie there as well. In the days leading up to the gathering, the town was abuzz with preparations. City Hall granted permission to set up a small canopy in the park to provide shade for older guests and to organize a space for speeches. Children from the school made posters with drawings symbolizing the friendship between dogs and humans. Some volunteers brought colorful balloons, and a local florist donated arrangements to adorn the area around the ancient tree. There was an excited atmosphere. People felt something extraordinary was happening. They were not just unearthing a lost item, but recovering a forgotten piece of Cedarville's history, one that spoke of love, loss, resilience, and the powerful bond between a girl and her dog. Finally, the appointed day arrived. Early in the morning, a gentle sun illuminated the park, and a light breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, adding pleasant freshness. People arrived gradually, each greeting Margaret and the other organizers. A certain hush fell as many waited to see Eleanor, who seldom left the nursing home due to her fragile health. She arrived in a wheelchair, assisted by a kind nurse, and was greeted with applause and smiles. Margaret approached to hug her, both, their eyes brimming with tears. They were not longtime friends but shared a bond that had formed through the investigation. Right behind them walked Charlie, guided by John but without a leash, as he preferred to walk freely. He seemed calm, but upon nearing the tree he immediately became alert, looking from Margaret to Eleanor, as if recognizing someone important. The very small crowd parted to let Eleanor reach the exact spot where Margaret had dug up the letter and the pendant. She looked around, studied the tree, touched its trunk, and for a fleeting moment closed her eyes, as if she were reliving her childhood days spent there with Emily. A stronger breeze blew through, shaking the branches and sending leaves swirling in circles. Silence fell, everyone respectfully honoring that sacred moment. Then Margaret approached with the box holding the items and opened it in front of Eleanor. Inside were the letter, now protected by a special plastic sleeve, and the paw-shaped pendant, cleaned and restored as much as possible. Eleanor extended trembling hands and picked up the pendant first. Upon feeling the cool weight of the metal, it was as if she were touching her own childhood. A mixture of longing, sorrow, and peace washed over her face. She ran her fingers along the paw shape, once again closing her eyes, as if silently conversing with Emily and Toby. Then she took the letter. Though she couldn't read it all on the spot, many lines were blurred. Just seeing Emily's handwritten words made her cry. The nurse was at her side, offering a handkerchief. For a few moments no one spoke. They didn't need to. The park, the trees, the leaves, the wind, and even the ground under their feet seemed to be composing a silent symphony, an ode to memory and the love that transcends generations. Charlie, in turn, approached Eleanor, sniffed her feet and hands, and rested his snout on her lap. It was as if a dog were greeting someone he had always known, but was only now meeting again. Eleanor stroked his head and whispered, "Thank you, my dear. Thank you." No one could say whether Charlie understood the importance of that moment, but his warm gesture said it all. The community, moved, began to clap, and soon the applause turned into hugs, smiles, and meaningful glances. Margaret, feeling the need, to articulate what everyone was feeling, raised her voice to address the group. "My friends, today we are celebrating more than just finding a lost object. We are celebrating the power of love, the unity that exists in Cedarville, and above all, the persistence of our canine friends, who so often teach us about loyalty and hope." Without speaking a single word, Charlie led us to this treasure from the past. And what we discovered wasn't just a pendant or a letter, but a life story of affection and longing that connects Emily, Toby, and now all of us. May we keep in our hearts the lesson that it's never too late to reclaim memories and mend what time has broken. And of course, may we always care for our animals, for they have much to tell us, even if they don't speak our language. Margaret's words were met with tears and applause. Gratitude filled the air. Many people realized for the first time how much history may lie buried, literally and metaphorically, beneath our feet, waiting to be discovered and healed. Inspired by all they had experienced, the residents of Cedarville decided to establish an annual event, something that would preserve Charlie's lesson and pay tribute to Emily and Toby's memory. The idea was to bring families, seniors, children, and their pets together for a day of community in the park, promoting animal adoptions, hosting environmental education workshops, collecting donations for shelters, and above all, celebrating the good stories that emerge from compassion. That festival, christened Memory and Animal Friendship Day, became part of the town's official calendar. In its first year, Eleanor, deeply moved, attended despite her frailty. Children performed plays inspired by Emily's, Toby's, and Charlie's search, and a small plaque was placed next to the tree in the park, summarizing how the pendant and letter were discovered. At the center of the plaque was the image of a dog's paw and the inscription, "May we never lack Charlie's persistence or Toby's love." Over time, the festival's renown spread. People from neighboring towns came with their pets, making donations of pet food, toys, and blankets to local shelters. On certain weekends, the park bustled with children running around, dogs playing, live music, food trucks, and craft stalls. Cedarville, once so quiet, gained a new surge in tourism. And everyone remembered that it all began thanks to a dog who refused to stop staring at a particular patch of grass. Although the story reached a beautiful and unifying conclusion, many continued to wonder, but why did Charlie stay there every day, as if he were on duty? Answers abound. Some believe remnants of Toby's scent lingered in the soil across the decades. Others speak of residual energy, a spiritual connection bridging generations of dogs and humans. Still others favor a mystical explanation, suggesting that Toby's or Emily's spirit was calling out, and Charlie, with his canine sensitivity, responded to that call. The truth is, no one knows for sure, and perhaps the mystery is part of the allure. Some happenings enrich our lives precisely because they elude immediate scientific explanation. Everyone agrees, however, that Charlie somehow served as a catalyst for a reunion with the town's memory. Without him, the letter and the pendant would likely have remained buried forever, and Emily and Toby's story would never have come to light. After everything, Margaret's daily routine changed as well. She discovered a new mission, documenting local histories that, like Emily and Toby's, were in danger of being lost. She began interviewing the elderly, jotting down their tales, digitizing old photographs, and building a virtual archive of Cedarville. With the local government's support, and together with teacher Elizabeth, she formed a history club for the school's younger students. They met regularly to discuss legends, real facts, and interesting curiosities of the past. Enthusiasm for bygone days grew, and thus other memories were spared from oblivion. Margaret also made it part of her schedule, along with John, to walk Charlie. Instead of letting the dog stay alone in the park, she joined him. They strolled the neighborhood, visited the library, and spent some quiet time under the big tree. Not to look for something lost anymore, but to appreciate nature and give thanks. During these walks, Margaret felt a serene joy, as if she finally understood that often the answers we seek appear when we choose to observe the world more closely and keep our hearts open to surprises. Eleanor, though physically weak, found renewed, emotional strength after reconnecting with her sister's story. It was as though a part of her, left behind in 1945, had finally been restored. She seemed more eager to live, talked often to Margaret, and even attended some Memory and Animal Friendship Day events. She wore a bittersweet smile when she saw Charlie and other kids playing with dogs in the park. Sometimes she lamented not having had more time with Emily, but she took comfort in knowing that her sister's memory, and Toby's, was now honored and shared. John, Charlie's owner, was a simple, hard-working man who had rarely involved himself in the town's happenings. But once his dog became the key to solving a local historical mystery, everyone recognized him and greeted him warmly. At first, he felt awkward receiving so much attention, but gradually he realized he was part of something bigger. He was grateful that Charlie had touched so many lives in a positive way. In private conversations with Margaret, he admitted to having faced hard times in the past few years, dealing with depression and loneliness, but Charlie's companionship had always given him strength. "I never imagined he'd be capable of something like this. I loved him for being my best friend, but I had no idea he'd become a hero to the entire town," John said, tears in his eyes, at one of the committee meetings. If Cedarville's community spirit had been strong before, now it grew even stronger. The story of Emily, Toby, and Charlie became a glue that bound the residents together, inspiring empathy and solidarity. People who hardly spoke started exchanging greetings and sharing updates about the investigation. Families came to value their own photo albums more, searching for hidden treasures in them to share. New research groups even formed to look into other old stories, hoping to uncover more treasures buried in or around the town. Shops like the grocery store, bakery, and barber shop began displaying newspaper clippings about the event. With the influx of curious visitors, the local economy got a boost. Of course, some people criticized the excessive hype, but they were few. Most embraced the happiness and sense of pride. Cedarville finally had its own urban legend, which, incredibly, was entirely true. While everyone focused on Emily and Toby, other parallel stories surfaced. An elderly man named Gregory remembered burying a box of war memorabilia in his yard when he returned from military service, and he decided to dig it up to share with his grandchildren. A 9-year-old, inspired by Margaret's success, investigated the history of a broken swing at school and discovered it had been built by a local carpenter who had long since passed away. In this way, Charlie's case sparked a mini-revolution of memory archaeology. People realized that every abandoned object, every forgotten corner, might hold a priceless story. One of the most moving aspects of this entire journey was how time can bury both tragedies and treasures, whether tangible or emotional. Emily was a girl who, in 1945, suffered the loss of her pendant and beloved Toby. This sorrow, seemingly lost to the past, still resonated decades later, waiting to be acknowledged and healed. It's almost poetic to imagine that a dog from another era, Charlie, would appear to reopen that chapter and rally the town to resolve a long unfinished story. Perhaps the bond between humans and dogs is so profound that it transcends generations. In many homes, dogs are part of the family, experiencing happy moments and comforting us during sad times. Even without words, they stand by us. Toby was that steadfast support for Emily in her youth, and Charlie became something similar, not just for one person, but for an entire town. It's a reminder that sometimes life delivers wonderful surprises beyond all logic. As time went on, Charlie's story took on the quality of a founding myth for the new generation. Students wrote papers on it, and small theater productions and musical numbers dramatized the quest for Emily's pendant and Toby's companionship, led by Charlie. Signs were placed around the park to mark the letter tree, displaying photos from the day Eleanor received the items. Even though the tree itself held no magic powers, for many people it stood as a symbol of hope, proof that when something seems lost forever, there may still be a chance to recover it. Charlie carried on with his canine life contentedly. On sunny days, you could see him out with John, or chasing butterflies with children. On rainy days, he preferred to stay at Margaret's house, accepting her affection and dog biscuits. Whenever there was an event in the park, he was the guest of honor, and people loved taking pictures with him. Though he didn't grasp why everyone made such a fuss over him, he repaid their kindness with licks and a wagging tail. For Eleanor, her final years were marked by the sense of mission accomplished. Although her health limited her mobility, she felt gratified to see the town paying tribute to Emily and Toby. She received letters and messages from countless people touched by her story, and in a way, she felt her life's journey had come full circle by resolving that decades-old emotional wound. The annual festival continued, growing in scope. With its popularity, animal protection NGOs got involved, and other towns started replicating the event. As technology advanced, stories of Charlie's exploits were shared online, on social media, and in national news outlets. Some speculated that the story might inspire a film or a book. Indeed, amateur documentaries sprang up, filmed by young artists hoping to capture Cedarville's narrative. In some of these short features, you'd see emotional clips of Margaret meeting Charlie, interviews with John, Sally, and other older residents reminiscing about the town before and after Charlie's discovery. They were simple videos but filled with feeling, always accompanied by gentle music, images of the park, and a narrator emphasizing the power of empathy and the magic in our connection with pets. We now reach the end of this long journey of recollections and revelations, but like every truly profound tale, its legacy lives on in everyone who has heard it. Maybe you, reader, are wondering, after all this, what should I take away from it? There are countless answers. Perhaps it's the realization that time does not erase everything. It often merely conceals. Perhaps it's the certainty that when we unite, we can solve mysteries and heal old wounds. Or perhaps it's a reminder that animals have a great deal to teach us about love, loyalty, and even